Moving along now to auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are a little more complicated. As the name suggests, they are there to support verbs. They are a function kind of verb that is there to support the content verb in the predicate. They always come in front of the verb, although if you have a preverbal adverb as well, the preverbal adverb will always be the one right next to the verb. So here is a sentence where there's both an auxiliary verb plus the preverbal adverb before the main verb. So the preverbal adverb will always be right in front of the verb, and then the auxiliary verb a little bit further away in front. And there are two distinct types of auxiliary verbs. The first type we call true auxiliaries. They're called true auxiliaries because they are really supporting the verb. They're enhancing our interpretation of the verb in different kinds of ways. They modify how we interpret the verb in different grammatical ways. So they indicate things like tense. So when an event occurs in time, they indicate things like aspect, which is how does the event unfold in time, and they indicate things like voice, which is the perspective of the subject relating to the verb, which we will talk about in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. So there are only 3 true auxiliaries, so that's not very many just to memorize. We've got the auxiliary verb to be, to have, and to do. So be, have, and do are the 3 true auxiliaries. In contrast to true auxiliaries, we have modal auxiliaries. And the modal auxiliaries are a little bit different. They are there. We use modal auxiliaries to set up some kind of relationship that the subject has to an event. And in each case, the event is a hypothetical event. So the event, like the predicate part of the sentence, is hypothetical, as in it's not real. It's just something in the mind of the speaker, but it's not something that's actually really happening. For modal auxiliaries, the types of relationships that they might indicate the subject has to the event in relationships like obligation or capability or possibility or future intention, and we'll go into more details in a few minutes. Modal auxiliaries are not hard to memorize. We have the 3 ood pairs, the can, could, will, would, shall, should. So you can probably see why I call them the ood pairs, the 2 C's, the 2 W's, and the 2 SH ones. And then we have our 3 M's, may, must, might. So the 3 ood pairs and the 3 M's is the total set of modal auxiliaries, and it's a good idea to get those memorized at some point before the final exam. So auxiliary verbs, yes, they support the verbs. Let's start looking at the true auxiliaries in a little bit more detail. In particular, we'll look at to be and to have, because the job of these guys is to work in conjunction with the inflectional suffixes, the present participle and the past participle on the verb, and that tells us how to interpret that verb. So if we pair the auxiliary verb to be with the present participle suffix, we say interpret this verb as ongoing through time. We call that progressive aspect, so a progressive interpretation of the verb. So this reading event is ongoing through time. That's be plus the present participle ing on the end. If, on the other hand, we pair the auxiliary verb to be with the past participle suffix, which is sometimes ed and sometimes un, it depends on the verb. So pair the auxiliary verb to be with the past participle suffix, we generate the passive voice interpretation. The passive voice is where the subject of the sentence is not the doer of the action. Instead, the subject of the sentence has the action done to it. We call it the patient in this scenario. So the opening event is not being performed by the book. The book is not opening something else up. The opening event is happening to the book. And since the book is in subject position, we call that passive voice interpretation. Okay, the third kind of pairing is pairing the auxiliary verb to have with the past participle suffix, and this is what we use to generate the perfect tense interpretation. This is a tense, an expression of tense, so timing, the timing of the event. When did an event take place in time? And the perfect tense means it happened prior to some other event. So we have two events here. We have a finishing of the book event, and we have a talking about it in class event. And by pairing auxiliary verb to have with the past participle, we're saying the finishing of the book event happened prior to some talking event. Now the talking is in the past, so this is even further in the past, which is marked by the past tense form of the auxiliary verb in conjunction with the suffix. Okay, moving on to the auxiliary verb to do. What are we doing with the auxiliary verb to do? Why do we need that guy? We need that guy to negate sentences and to turn sentences into questions, and to turn kind of declarative sentences into what we call the interrogative, or to mark interrogation. So an interrogation is turning it into a question. Okay, so here are a couple of sentences that are not, they are both positive declarative sentences. So no negation, no interrogation. She is coming. You smile a lot. Now, to do negation and interrogation, we need an auxiliary verb. Here is an auxiliary verb already in this sentence. She is coming. So it's quite easy to negate this, she is not coming, or to turn it into a question, is she coming? Where we just take is and put it to the front. But in a sentence like you smile a lot, we don't have an auxiliary verb to work with. So negation, how do we form negation? Well, we need to put not in the sentence. And where do we put not? We put it right after the auxiliary verb. So she is coming. There already is an auxiliary verb there, so it's very easy just to negate that. She is not coming. But in you smile a lot, how do we negate that? We don't say you smile not a lot. We need an auxiliary verb, so we have to put in do. Do we call a dummy auxiliary because it just sits in there in the auxiliary slot. We need an auxiliary, so we just throw do in there, and that allows us to then negate the affirmative statement there. Okay, for interrogation then, to turn it into a question, how do we make questions in English? How do we create a question or interrogation structure? We find the auxiliary verb, and then we have to move the auxiliary verb to the position in front of the subject. So she is coming becomes is she coming, where the auxiliary verb just moves to the front. But again, in you smile a lot, there's no auxiliary verb. So we don't say smile you a lot like they do in French. We need an auxiliary verb. So we kind of throw do in there, and then we move do to the beginning of the sentence. So that creates the interrogative structure, and we get do you smile a lot. Okay, now we've got our modal auxiliaries, the would, pairs, and the M's, the can, could, shall, should, will, would, may, must, might. What is the job of these guys? Well, here we have the subject has some kind of relationship to an event, to a hypothetical event, so nothing that's happening in the real world. It's not happening now. It hasn't necessarily happened in the past. So here's the subject, she, and here's an event, study algebra. Now, if there's no modal here and we put the subject together with the predicate, then we have to put this event in time, and then we would have to put some kind of inflection on the end of the verb. So she studies algebra if it's not in the past, or she studied algebra if it's in the past. But let's say studying algebra is just hypothetical. So it's nothing really happening now. It's nothing that really happened in the past. But we want to express some kind of relationship that the subject has to that. So we might throw in an auxiliary verb or a modal auxiliary like might. And that indicates a relationship of possibility, that the subject has the possibility to do this event. Must kind of strengthens it. Now we have a sense of obligation that the subject has to do something for her benefit. Will, so to mark future in English, we use a modal auxiliary because the future is always hypothetical, right? It's not real in the world. So will is the modal auxiliary that we use to mark future intention of something. Can could either be she has the ability to do it or the capability to do it, which are very similar but a little bit different. And then something like should, so it's under advisement that this happens. So those just a selection of some of the types of relationships that a subject could have to a hypothetical event. Okay. Moving on, conjunctions. The job of conjunctions are they support all the different kinds of words because their job is to link together two of exactly the same kind of constituent. So they link together, they can combine, and is the basic combining conjunction. So I love puppies and kittens. So here we've got two nouns being conjoined together. He went into the house and up the stairs. Here we've got two preposition phrase being conjoined. We could move over to the conjunction or, where here now you're kind of excluding one option or the other. So swim or sunbathe, where two verbs are being conjoined. Leafy greens or raw carrots, two noun phrases are being conjoined together. Then we have but, and, or, but. These are the three conjunctions that you need to memorize. We have some kind of accepting thing. This test is long but easy, so there's kind of an exception idea here. I like competing, but I find training to be boring. Here we're conjoining two complete sentences. So the key with these coordinating conjunctions is that you're always linking together two of exactly the same thing. Two phrases of the same type, two basic content categories of the same type. That's what those conjunctions are doing. The last kind of function word I want to talk about are the complementizers. Complementizers are a little bit different. We're not really going to get into these too much, but the idea of the complementizer is that they are introducing a small sentence that surfaces inside a big sentence. So sometimes we have a little sentence here, like you are right, and that is inside a big sentence. I know that you are right. The complementizer links in the small sentence into the big sentence and kind of indicates a sense of certainty, or what is the degree of certainty. So if I say I know that you are right, then that you're saying, yeah, this is something that's asserted, that we kind of know this is true to be, especially paired up with the main verb know. If, on the other hand, we use if there's some lack of certainty, I wonder if it will rain today. But again, we've got the small sentence, it will rain today. Inside the big sentence, I wonder if it will rain today. The last complementizer is whether, and whether is very, very similar to if. The only difference really is that whether, I think, kind of restricts it to there's only two options, and so it's one of the two options. I can ask whether it is due today, so it's either due or not due today. There's only two options, but again, there's kind of we're not certain about which option to take. So that, whether, and if are the three complementizers, and it's good just to memorize those guys. Okay, so the key thing here is to remember the pairings, especially when we're doing noun phrases, verb phrases, and adjective, preposition, and adverb phrases. Remember these pairings. The job of the determiner is to support the noun. The job of the preverbal adverb is to support the verb. The job of the degree word is to support adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. Also, it's good just to memorize some stuff. So just memorize the three conjunctions, the three coordinating conjunctions that we need to know: and, or, but. There's a whole set of subordinating conjunctions that we're not going to worry about. Things like before and however and things like that. But and or but are the only conjunctions you need to know. We've got our true auxiliaries, be, have, and do. We've got our modal auxiliaries, can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, must, might, right? The three ud pairs, the three M's. Just memorize all those guys and you should be good. And then I guess also memorize the complementizers, that, whether, and if, and you should be good for your function words.